I apologize. Welcome to Crossing Faiths. I'm John Pinna, and today we're going to be talking about the nexus of AI and faith, communities, and religion, dignity of the human person. And today we have a really interesting and amazing guest, Devan Patel, who's a lawyer, strategist, and works on with the Vatican to engage multi-faith communities on ethics, AI, and dignity of the human person. So welcome.
Thank you for having me, JT.
So, I sent you an article, and and it's always a little bit. I always get a little bit nervous when I send something over that hasn't been printed, and we're right at the point of sort of like noodling over the correct words. But what did you think of that article?
Thought it was great. It was a welcome addition to the discussion as Pope Leo releases his encyclical Magnifica Humanitas and really brings the faith component into the conversation around AI, human dignity, ethics, as you mentioned, as well as international security issues, children and families, education, right? The whole gamut of issues. So I think it's certainly welcome to have different faith voices now entering into the fray because I think we need an all of the above approach as we tackle these issues.
Well, but there was also something. There was also a moment where you paused. Did you say? And what was that? Was that in the first line or first paragraph? What was that?
First few lines, you may have intimated that folks historically don't really listen when the Vatican speaks.
Well, and so it's a great sort of talking point or starting point. I think is that for I've been asked and what's going on with the Vatican, and they're having these meetings, and there's the dicastery who's involved with this, and I go, I'm not sure, I'm not an agent of the Vatican, but they're in the game, and so they're very forward with mobilizing resources and getting involved. But for a long time, the Vatican was very insular, and I think a lot of people get intimidated by the terminology, right? So you have the Magnifica Humanitas, you got the encyclical, you got dicasteries, which dicastery I think is just a fancy term for department, but I'm not sure. Not sure. And so there's also this sort of stepping into that world. Everybody one is gets intimidated by just the terminology and the Latinness, and everybody's kind of figuring out what's going on there. But then in the same respect, I think for a long time, there has been it's been difficult to understand or get a reading on what the Vatican was up to and what they were doing and what the priorities were from an outsider's perspective.
Well, I think it's even difficult from an insider's perspective, or if you're a member of the 1.4 billion Catholic faithful. This is what you get when you have a 2,000-year-old institution that has many different interest groups. It is functionally a royal court, right? The Holy See, this Vatican as a city state is a monarchy. And you have these dicasteries, as you mentioned, which are just a fancy different word for departments that have been serving across various papacies at some point that are all trying to get their arms around different issues, different cultural issues, societal, political, faith, theological, philosophical. And so you have a lot of butting heads, as you would in any sort of cabinet or administration or royal court. So it's not always easy for those of us on the inside as well in the faith.
I mean, I'm the one with the funny hat in this recording. So are you clergy, or like, how what's the connection to for you in the Catholic Church? Because everybody would see my name as an Italian name, right? Which it was Panà, which was Farsi and it was Latinized to Pinna when my family came through Italy, right, to America. So that's that, and you're Patel. So we're in this sort of strange environment where we're kind of mixed up here, or as far as if someone was looking at it from the outside and sort of making a judgment from what's going on. What's your connection to the Catholic Church?
I am a convert to the faith. I entered the church a few years ago now. Originally grew up in a half Hindu, half Jain household. So I'm the first in my family to convert to Catholicism, to Christianity. And I'm not a member of the clergy. I don't have the collar. I'm just a faithful and loving a servant of God and love to be part of the church.
So, and you're in the Beltway, so you're a government relations guy with legal ability. You're a lawyer, but then you're also got this connectivity with the Silicon Valley, and so how has this all come together where you're really the tip of the spear when it comes to engagement on this issue for the Vatican.
Absolutely. So I should also clarify, I'm not doing this on behalf of the Vatican. I'm not an agent of the Vatican, unless they want me to be, in which case, Pope Leo, please call me. But I am trying to help the church in America, the church global, deal with this issue in various different ways, like you mentioned, especially at the intersection where DC, Rome, and Silicon Valley meet, right, on tech, ethics, and policy. I've been working in DC now in policy and law for about a decade, got my legal education at Notre Dame, and have been working in Washington at the intersection of issues like religious liberty, combating anti-Semitism, national security, immigration, refugee issues, all the way to election law. And then for the last 5 or 6 years, AI, ethics, and national security. And so it was really these last 5 or 6 years where things started to come together in various different areas of my life and previous work history that I didn't plan on sort of coming to a head. And so in my religious liberty work, I worked with various coalitions of faith leaders to deploy on state and federal uh, policy issues, litigation issues, you name it, in the culture, media, and through building those networks, I saw a great opportunity back in 2020, 2021, as then Pope Francis was speaking rather loudly on the AI issue, which was, a surprise to all of us, that an 80-something-year-old pontiff from Argentina would start getting to this issue of AI well before it really entered the mainstream conversation. And so I saw that as sort of an opening and an invitation to start working with various faith groups to start tackling these issues that we were seeing.
I mean, it's just an amazing moment in time, and we're all touched one way or another by AI. We're all interacting with it. We're all affected by it in some manner, shape, or form. And for the church to be so forward with this, I mean, there's no other entity within the religious freedom or within the faith-based space that really has taken charge to convene, ponder, uh, engage on a multi-faith stage, as well as take a stance in such a manner in such a manner as the Catholic Church to date.
Absolutely. It's a rare thing to see. But it's certainly a welcome thing to see. And from speaking with various faith leaders from across the world, at least privately and now publicly, as you can see in the discourse online, I think it's a much welcome development, even if you're not a member of the Catholic Church. I convened, we spoke about this offline. I convened a group of Jewish and Christian faith leaders from around the world back in October at the Vatican to talk about these various issues. And in the room, one prominent evangelical leader had spoken to the entire room and said, hey guys, we really need to follow the lead of the Pope here. And I wouldn't have that on my bingo card, that a prominent evangelical leader would say that, but there we were, and because I think the moment is calling for, you know, all of us to kind of get past our parochial interests within various faith traditions, focus on that which we agree, and really assert this human-centric vision in an AI conversation that's being dominated by folks who are developing this technology or who are funding it and deploying it who really don't believe that the human should remain at the center of it.
Yeah, it's an interesting component where you have this the tech world is doing what they do best, and there's no, I'm not taking necessarily a stance on that in that statement, but the idea is that if you're a tech guy, you're all about the machine learning, pushing everything, building bigger models, and from our other small or brief interaction that I'm all about smaller models and judgment engines and subject matter experts coming together and then having specificity in what the tool is supposed to do. But the Vatican has done something amazing. So you're now conducting engagement, but something happened, right? There was presumably there. So to start with the previous pope, where there was a dialogue going on about what to do with this, and then there was a series of meetings that had happened, and then the issuance of what would be they're not papal bulls, are they? What would they be considered?
So this was an encyclical, which is its own separate category.
All right, so separate. So, and this is part of that. first statement in that article. It's like there's all these sort of nuance that we're like, do we step on toes? So there was a meeting, and so like what happened when that in that meeting, that gathering, that really kind of kicked off this dialogue that led to this document called the encyclical.
Absolutely. So this was something that's been in the works now for quite a while, and at least in this current pontificate, right, with Pope Leo, whose encyclical this is, this goes back to the first day of his papacy. On day one, right after he was elected, he gathered all of the cardinals in Rome to address them, and explained within the first few minutes why he chose the name Leo XIV and what he sees as the sort of critical issues facing the world today. And he took the name Leo XIV after his predecessor Leo XIII, who served as pope in the late 19th century and who issued his own encyclical at the time called Rerum Novarum, or On New Things, which was a response then to the Industrial Revolution, which was really taking the world by storm, which was, ushering in new challenges around labor issues, around the dignity of work, around the environment, around workers' rights, around even these new philosophical political traditions that, we had capitalism on one hand and what was then becoming, a more politicized form of communism. And so Pope Leo XIII was responding to this massive change in the world back then. And Pope Leo XIV, on day one of his papacy, told the cardinals, the reason why he chose his name was, to harken back to the Pope who sort of ushered the church through this new era and created the modern understanding of Catholic social tradition and doctrine. Um, and that Pope Leo XIV sees this new industrial age that we're in as the AI age, and that it would require no less of a robust response from the church throughout the world, but also all people of goodwill to ensure that we keep human dignity at the forefront.
And it's, I mean, the previous Pope Leo was looking forward with, in the context of his day. Now this, now the current Pope is now is really addressing the issues, and that's kind of like that initial statement that I made in that article. I'm like, it's like it's just an amazing moment to see a Pope in game, like, and it's with something that we're all concerned about. That's really on the tip of everyone's tongue, and so to bring that about in a way where he's mobilizing these resources. So so he convenes the encyclical. There's a multi-faith crowd there, and they're engaging. And so how did it resonate with the multi-faith leaders that were present?
From everyone I've spoken to, and sort of hearing down through the game of telephone, other folks who spoke to others, like we mentioned, I think it's much welcomed, and I think it's sort of giving folks in the faith community or in just the general pro-human camp of the world, which I'd like to consider as most of the world, the opportunity to kind of breathe a sigh of relief that, someone has, stepped forward in this conversation in a big way that is given a permission structure, both by form in the encyclical, but also in function with the conversation that he's actively engaging in and bringing folks from tech, academia, and other faith communities into that, we have all of a sudden um, such an opportunity, right? To be a part of the conversation, to enter into conversation, to be at tables that previously in just the last couple of years, folks would not have a seat at, right? Faith leaders would not have a seat at the table with these tech developers, with policymakers. Maybe they'd have a seat with academics, but that might be it. And so I think a lot of the reaction has been, and don't get me wrong, it's not unanimous. There are plenty of folks both within the church and out who have nits to pick with the encyclical and what how the event went down a few weeks ago in Rome. But I think the overwhelming response is really a sigh of relief.
Right. Well, I mean, opening the doors is just that in itself. That was surprising. I'm like, what are you doing? What's going on? And so and that to me is just it's you have this wonderful space at at Vatican, and you have all these dicasteries. Some some are charged with like the interreligious engagement, some are charged with education, or this all these different, and so that's what you like to see with an organization as old and with the legitimacy, but also having the space to do something like this, that and the department's charged with it. So and so that was one of the things that sort of resonated with me when I'm like kind of thinking about this, going, oh my God. So when the different faith communities, when they're interpreting that from the encyclical, your experience of interpreting AI's, do they interpret AI's risk differently? What is like your ear to the ground, and if so, like how are they interpreting the risks of AI?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a universal understanding, because if you're a faith leader or just a person of faith, and you're confronted with the challenges and both challenges and opportunities of AI, I think we're all responding in a similar way, right? When I've spoken to rabbis, evangelical leaders, Latter-day Saint leaders, Catholic Church leaders, Muslim leaders, it's yeah, Buddhists, it's all sort of the same when confronted with the issue, for example, of children who are interacting with these companion chatbots and end up hurting themselves, hurting others, unfortunately committing suicide at times, being convinced to leave their faith communities, to disassociate from friends and family, this litany of issues. It doesn't matter if you're wearing a hat or not, or what color you're wearing. I think it's a pretty universal reaction of, my goodness, there's something seriously wrong and seriously at stake here that we need to engage with. And at the end of the day, there is a common, a shared tradition in most faiths, right? Some variation of the golden rule exists, and folks are approaching these issues in AI and these opportunities, I think, with that in mind, right? I think all of us, regardless of faith tradition, understand that labor is more than just a check to receive, right? It is a dignity enhancing way of being, that man and woman have inviolable dignity from our Creator. We can disagree with the conception of that Creator, and I certainly welcome those earnest discussions. But right, these challenges, these opportunities, I think everyone's understanding them from the same perspective, which is why I think there's this openness with having the Pope sort of lead on this issue and open the door for folks. And so I'm thrilled that this is happening, and I love to see all this interfaith and multi-faith engagement.
Right. I think everybody's concerned, and then where the concern lies. Like, there's people are. I've seen different churches use AI as there's an AI Jesus out there. So like Hazatiza, right? And so and people are engaging back and forth, and the challenge is how do you govern what is going on that back end, and how do you interpret dignity, right? How do you interpret ethics and rules? How do you interpret all those things? And so, and I think we're all kind of wrestling with that. But where is this? Like, what's the status now? Like, what was the outcome, right? So, forget about my first statement in the article. What when it comes to what was issued out of the encyclical? How would you sum it up for someone who's listening, who wants to hear like the elevator pitch? And I'm not devaluing the Pope, and I'm not devaluing your work at all. I'm just saying, if you cut to the chase, you say, okay, we're concerned about these three things. This is why, and this is what we're calling for: a convening of people to discuss what.
Well, first off, I should caveat, especially as a lawyer, 43,000 words, at least the English version, hard to sum up very quickly.
I know it's a big thing, and so as a lawyer, I'd say, what does it appear to be to present, right? What is the feel of it, or what would they say? The intent of the law, right? What would be the intent of the document?
Absolutely. So, I think first and foremost, right, the title of the document translated into English is Magnificent Humanity. And I
Okay.
think that, and, the subtitle is, on safeguarding the human person in the time of artificial intelligence. I think that right there is the crux of the issue, right? It's in order to safeguard the human person in this new AI revolution, we only need look back to that which makes humanity magnificent, right? It's not simply the economic gains that humanity has come to achieve. It's not simply the scientific achievements, though laudable and amazing, that we've achieved, right? It is a very core issue that For Catholics, for Christians, it goes back to the gospel uh, of Jesus Christ that, we are creatures of God, right? We are made in the image and likeness of that God. And God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, Jesus Christ, to come down on this earth to suffer an incredibly painful life and death, and through that death and resurrection to redeem humanity. And so, in a very Christian Catholic perspective, what saves humanity is not the self-sufficiency that is kind of being sold to us by Silicon Valley, by these utilitarians and transhumanists and posthumanists and rationalists, but it's this liberating relationship that we have with God. And so I sort of couch everything in those terms, and then from there, the Pope goes everywhere from the philosophical and theological all the way to the concrete and political. Right? He calls for actual legislative action when it comes to protecting and safeguarding children and families. He calls for a new educational alliance between families, institutions, from universities down to schools, parishes, to respond to these new challenges that we have in AI, in schools, in all this and this sort of tech and how it's and social media and how it has sort of rippled through childhood development and what it's done to even adults' attention spans, right? So there are many layers here, but what the Pope is doing is writing this 43,000 word document that's approachable for not just the theologian, not just the philosopher, but for the educator, for the layman, for the parent, for the policymaker. And I think that is something that we should certainly approach the document with a frame of mind. And I'd also be remiss if I didn't mention one of my favorite parts of the encyclical, is the Pope actively repudiating these visions of transhumanism and posthumanism, explicitly, and then implicitly rationalism and effective altruism, right? The big four sort of philosophies that have taken root in Silicon Valley and have really led the charge in tech development, but also in how the sort of Silicon Valley world, not everyone to be sure, but how the loudest voices are relating to or trying to relate beyond humanity. And so I think what the Pope is doing here is very deft.
Yeah, it's a wonderful engagement tool because we know from an outsider's perspective, we kind of know where the Vatican stands now, and it opens up the idea where we can engage and have a dialogue based on what was the stance that was taken, right? That's amazing. Otherwise it's just a dialogue or a talk or like a speech with like a tagline, and that's all great. But now there is, like I said, there's a resources, there's dicasteries associated with it. Now there's a document, and so when it comes to like, how the faith it was received by different faith leaders, what unique perspectives like were part of the conversation that came from the multi-faith community?
Yeah, I would say, well, first, I think it's important that everyone kind of comes around and came around to, or at the common understanding that we all have, that, despite what folks in many different countries and with many different agendas want to sort of push, right? That yes, we do have differences theologically, philosophically, but there's a lot in common here, and especially vis-a-vis this conversation on AI that's so implicative of what it means to be human and what our relationship will be to each other, to labor, to industry, to technology, right? That we actually have a lot in common here. And so I think number one, just having a common basis is sounds so simple, but is not, as you well know, and as I well know, we've been in the multi-faith space. It's not always easy, even when you're working within the same religious tradition that has multiple denominations or sects.
It could be worse. It could be worse.
It could be a lot worse.
It could be a lot worse. So I can imagine. Just the Catholic Church is so big. I can't even imagine. That because there's a priest here, and there could be a priest over here, and who knows? I read Name of the Rose every year.
Hmm,
You know the book,
I
and
don't.
so well, you're a Catholic. This is so I read every year. I read Name of the Rose, and it's about a library that holds all this stuff. And there's a movie. There's two movies actually. There's one with the guy who plays James Bond. the
Pierce Brosnan, Daniel Craig,
the older guys, the guy, the Sean Connery,
Sean
uh,
Connery. Yep.
and so Sean Connery, and there's a movie about it, but then there was there was a TV show, there was a TV series on it, and so basically there's a murder or there's a series of deaths, and they send the Vatican inspector like guy, the guy who solves crimes, right there, and it's during it's at the backdrop of the Inquisition. So, but it's and so at this library are sort of the remnants of different Catholic groups like the Cathars and stuff like that that were kind of hammered during that period, right? And so there's all these nuances of these people and who they are and where they came from and kind of what happened. And so, and the only reason I'm at it, this is totally down a rabbit hole for us. But the reality is that, but the intrafaith components are are can be challenging, diverse, and on top of that, there the initiatives that are happening within different faith groups that could be ongoing or initiated within the ballpark of time that something new like this is can be challenging, right? And so AI is such a large overarching thing that's encompassing all of humanity or most of humanity, but each religious group is struggling with their own sort of issues right now, right? And so in the in Islam we're dealing with sort of a Reformation type of situation, right? We've got a political Islam on one side and then everyone else on the other side, and that's essentially what's going on. And so the challenge is that if you try to inject yourself in between that, then it's like the Ottomans getting in between in the Reformation between the Protestants and the Catholics, right? It's like it wouldn't work.
Right.
But they were the superpower at the time. Anyways, in any event, the challenge is that like we're all dealing with this AI ethics, and there's not a lot of unity within faith groups that have multiple sects. And so it's dependent on individuals like you that are engaging and getting a sense of what's going on and aggregating all that information and translating it into something that's cohesive. And so how has that been a challenge for you? It's because it's engaging different communities or communities within communities. I'm a Dune guy, so layers within layers. So maybe talk a little bit about how that has been a challenge, or it's been exciting, and maybe you've headed in some interesting directions where the information flows back that we need to kind of look at it this way, or this way.
Yeah, I'd say it's not too dissimilar from, mounting any sort of ambitious policy legislative campaign that requires squirrely coalitions to come together, that you have experience in as well. And so it's I think for those of us who love getting our hands dirty in these sorts of issues, it's a lot of fun, right? It's a great opportunity, especially this frontier issue with a literal frontier technology. It presents a great opportunity and in sort of shaping the conversation in so many different ways, right? Not just in the political sphere. And so, one, I think it's an exciting opportunity. Two, it's incredibly challenging because it's so frontier, right? There's so much that we don't know and that we have to almost be okay with not knowing. There's a huge information to time delay that even the frontier labs acknowledge, right? Chris Olah, one of the co-founders of Anthropic, was one of the speakers at the Pope's event releasing his encyclical, wherein he acknowledged that even as a co-founder of Anthropic, right, as somebody who is deep inside one of these labs, that there are things that we don't know. There are things that we don't have answers to, and so I think a huge challenge in this area compared to sort of anything that anyone in policy and politics and law and advocacy has ever worked on is there's just so much that's unknown, right? The unknown unknowns, as Donald Rumsfeld would say. But that I think brings a great opportunity for faith communities to really have a voice because where historically have faith communities really uh, added a huge net benefit? It's speaking to issues and situations that were murky, right? That didn't have definite answers, that people had anxiety around, that there was a lot of unknown scenarios that were involved, but faith communities came together, not always, but faith communities could lead on these issues by providing, right, a longitudinal point of view, right? That's I think the benefit of all these faith traditions, not just the Catholic tradition, right? We have 2,000 years of history to look back on, and so we have a lot of hindsight, and with that, we have I think the church has a stability by which it can operate even amidst such uncertainty. And the same is true for so many various faith traditions that have such a deep bench of tradition and history to look back on that says, we've been through these incredibly trying times before. Sure, they've taken different forms. Sure, they've come in different eras, geopolitical, technological, sociocultural, but we've waded through, and sometimes we dare say we've made it on the other end a lot better.
Right.
And so I think there's a real difference maker here for faith traditions in this conversation where there are such unknowns. So I think that's such a unique and interesting opportunity to lean into.
Yeah, I mean, who defines the ethics? That was one of the questions that was asked me. Who defines what like the box that AI goes into, right? Like who's making those decisions? And I said, well, right now I'm not sure anybody's making any decisions. And then you have the challenge of the algorithm. The more it's used, the more it changes, and the more it starts to change itself. We were talking behind it, I guess before we started recording. And what did I say? I said, "Go. Sometimes it's just nice to talk to AI because I'm smart enough, I'm good enough, and gosh darn it, people like me. According to my AI, I'm a great guy. And so it's one of those moments where it's like hard not to lean into it because it does kind of make you feel good, and it does want to make you happy. In the same respect, as you're feeding it information, it's you know it's learning not only from you, but it's aggregating in in the central hub, right? And so as it's aggregating all that information, the more faith-based leaders that are interacting with it, that becomes a component. But you can also be using it for all kinds of other issues, right? And the various issues, or like we were talking about earlier with the with with the, when young people are using it, it's drawing conclusions that could lead to harm. And so it'll aggregate all those as as things that are acceptable. And so how do you unpacking all these components? Is the how is the Vatican addressing sort of the 2.0 of the encyclical? What's the next stage? Is it have specificity, or is it you're really focused on faith engagement, having like a ground ups movement, sort of like almost like an election? You have your ground game and bringing people together. What's the next sort of practical steps for AI ethics and dignity within the context of what the Vatican's agenda is?
Absolutely. So, a next step institutionally for the Vatican, they've set up an interdicastery or interdepartmental working group on AI following the release of this encyclical, so that the various departments, dicasteries, can tackle the different components of AI, right? Because it's not just one little bucket of issues that can be very neatly assigned to one little department, right? Think about it from the own U.S. government's perspective, right? AI can't just be cabin into one thing and be assigned, oh well, Department of Treasury, you can handle AI, all of AI now. No. And so you have this new working group that can handle it from the various different competencies, right? Integral human development, culture and education, life, you name it, all these various issues, promoting Christian unity, interreligious dialogue, can come together and talk about the various issues and opportunities of AI, and really start working on and fleshing out the Holy Father's calls for action in the encyclical, which it's the Pope was I think right to uh, issue this encyclical with only a certain level of specificity rather than being overly specific. And he acknowledges in the document that he can't be too specific, because if he were, this document would be outdated very quickly. Right.
Sure.
The development of this technology is exponential. And so, right, just look back at the 2020 Rome call for AI ethics, which Pope Francis put out in partnership with various tech companies. Back then, this almost seems very quaint to us, right? Back then, the AI technology that they were concerned about and talking about in that document was facial recognition technology,
Right.
right? The stuff that is now found in our iPhones or our Ring cameras, right, was of such importance that it was that it was like the first major Vatican piece on AI ethics issues in partnership once again with tech companies. So the Pope Leo, what he's doing here is trying to get to a level of both specificity and generality in approach such that this document can be carried forward in a way that it's not outdated, by 1 or 2 years time. And so, in his call, right, this document is issued not just to the Catholic faithful, not just to the church, but to all people of goodwill. That there's a lot that can be done, both grassroots and grass tops. And so that's so right now, what I'm trying to do is help support the church's work, both here in this country through the USCCB, but also worldwide, whether through academia and kind of bringing together academics who are working on these various issues or who are thinking about various pieces and doing research on these various pieces, whether from an engineering perspective or philosophical or child welfare, you name it, to connecting with policymakers who are concerned about each of these various buckets, right? They're policymakers who are incredibly dialed in on the issues facing children. They're policymakers who are incredibly dialed in on the privacy right issues. They're, so on and so forth. And the problem is because AI is so broad that folks are often operating in silos. And so what I'm just trying to do is break down those silos in the meantime and get as many people talking as possible and connecting all the dots, such that we can sort of stay ahead to the extent that we can stay ahead of these issues, to try and do so from both a legislative, but also cultural perspective.
Yeah, I mean, my area is national security and human rights, and that's kind of like where my, and that we not that we don't go into those other areas a little bit, but I think that the and it's everything is a frontier space. It's difficult to kind of navigate yourself, but I think as we're engaging each other, it's becoming more and more helpful to have a community of concern around the idea of AI and then borrow with each other what's going on and go back and forth. I mean, the document in itself is, I think it leaves a lot for individuals, organizations, and different communities to have a dialogue on, and I feel like that's purposeful. And even though it takes a stances here, like on deep fakes, for example, then the harm deep fakes can be, but it leaves a lot open for dialogue, which I think is very purposeful in making sure that the document itself is an engagement model and where you can go someplace and say, here's the deal, this is what's going on. But it seems like the Vatican's receptive to meeting and talking and convening, and that's just I'm not sure if there's been anything like this where it's global. There's an engagement fatwa. There's an idea where anybody can contribute, and then there's this idea of concern. We're all trying to think about health and welfare, dignity, and who we are and what we're about and what we're going to become, and these are all seem like very Thomas Aquinas, like this idea of what's out there and what's going on and who are we, and for the church to take the lead on that is just an amazing moment in time, and not only that, but in the manner it's happening, it just seems like warm and fuzzy friendly. Do you know what I'm saying? As
Right.
opposed to, a bunch of nerds getting together and then they're saying, okay, this is what we think, and if you don't think it, you're going to hell. Like, which is generally what happens when you're dealing with, when you stances that are taken. But I think there's a taking out of theology so much, and taking out and keeping and moving it into the general space where we have that shared theology that you were mentioning earlier. This idea of like we all have the golden rule. We all have, the idea of bettering ourselves or serving something larger than ourselves, and so that space is, I think, was carefully curated in the document. I mean, would you agree?
Absolutely. I think, especially at a time globally where there is a growing distrust of institutions, I think your traditional sort of multilateral institutions like the UN are facing the deepest mistrust levels ever. I don't think at times for not good reasons, but so you have the traditional fora you can't really avail yourself of to bring folks together to have these discussions. And so I'm incredibly gladdened to see the Holy See and the Vatican step into this space and try and provide that space, right? To give the opportunity for folks to come together who are not just within the church. And as you said, it's sort of warm and fuzzy feelings, right? This is what you get when you elect an uncle from the Midwest, right? This is
Sure.
that Midwest nice. But this document and what Pope Leo is doing here, right, is an invitation to the start of a conversation, or at least the middle part of a conversation, rather than a conclusion and a full stop, right? This is not supposed to be the definitive. This is what we're saying. We're the first out the gate of any faith tradition institutionally to really handle this issue with such breadth. Therefore, full stop. This is what we say. This is all it's going to be, and get on or shut up.
Right.
It's this is nothing like that, right? This is simply a doors wide open. Please come on through. Let's work on this together.
Yeah, it's just an amazing moment in time. How's Silicon Valley, received it?
It's a pretty mixed bag.
Yeah.
I think if you did a sort of geolocated polling of the world, you might have the biggest red blot in Silicon Valley of sort of disagree. Um, but there once again, not to paint with the broad brush, there are definitely folks within Silicon Valley who are faith curious or who have faith who laud what's happening and welcome the conversation and the dialogue. You have folks who are simply baffled that this 2,000-year-old institution and this guy with the funny hat and outfit is trying to tell them what to do. And you have
Yeah, I can see
folks
that.
and you have folks like Peter Thiel who are trying to convince the Vice President of the United States not to listen to the leader of his church on these
Right.
issues. And Silicon Valley, I think a segment of Silicon Valley is understandably upset because they believe in a way of life and a version of humanity that ultimately is not at the center of life, that they want to transcend and get beyond a human-centric world because they see humans as problems to be optimized, and issues to be fixed, right? Or the frailty of the human body, right? Brian Johnson, this guy who's a billionaire who everyone sees on Twitter of trying to reverse his aging and never die, right? He uses his son's blood, right?
Right.
And he wants to conquer death and defeat it, right? Never mind the irony of those of us who, in various faith traditions, who have the answers to conquering death, that have been spelled out for us for millennia at times.
Sure.
But you have these people who very fundamentally see humans as problems, humans as issues, to be fixed, optimized, and transcended ultimately. And they're going to be upset, I think. And the Pope calls out these folks, and so
Well,
we'll see what sort of reception the Holy Father gets if and when he visits America and decides to make a trip to Silicon Valley.
yeah, I mean, this is a dialogue we're all kind of having one way or another at the micro and macro level. But for the Pope to really to take this on, that there's that like I said it's an amazing moment in time. But the idea of him taking responsibility for humanity in a way in which faith leaders, non-faith leaders can participate in defining what that is, but he's kind of taking the hit. It's kind of what he should be doing, and that's why this isn't it's not only coordinated, it's not only thoughtful, it's not only timely, but for him to take a step forward, there's risk in it. There's exposure, and that's tough. And I think that to acknowledge that is not only reasonable, but he's kind of tangling with the Peter Thiels of the world. It's like or the Elon Musk that look at everything as like black box and white box testing. Like everybody's like, needs to be either optimized or there's a bug and there's something wrong with them that needs to be righted. And so I think that there's a strange sort of sinister element to this that we all kind of don't know, but that are a little bit worried about on the other side. And so I mean, your engagement is amazing, and just the fact that you're willing to have this conversation with somebody like me, where we're chatting back and forth on this, and from two different beaches of the pond, but our concerns are similar. And then on top of that, we have this sort of document, in common with each other now. That's issued by the papacy. That gives us almost like a backdrop to frame a conversation, and that's an amazing moment in time. So I really appreciate taking the time out of your schedule and your engagement to kind of unpack some of these things and to let our listenership know what's going on.
Absolutely glad to be on here with you. Thank you for the opportunity again and this great conversation. I think, like the Pope invited us all, I think we need to be having these conversations and these dialogues because these issues are too big for various parochial issues, interests, and it's not just one faith tradition, one church that's going to solve this issue for everyone. We all need to buckle up and get to work.
Right on. I appreciate it. Thanks so much.
Thank you.